Welcome to another episode of our new hit podcast, MissTrial, on the Midas Touch Network. I'm Friedman Agnifilo with my co-host Kathleen Rice and Danya Perry. We're just going to jump right into it because our friend, colleague, and all things, if you want to know anything in law and politics, Norman Eisen, who attended every single day of the recent Manhattan DA Trump trial. We just want to jump right into it with you, Norm, and discuss that. We also want to discuss what is taking the Supreme Court so long in the presidential immunity sector, what's going on with that, and just everything else while we have you here for the next 45 minutes before you have to jump off. So we're going to jump right in. Tell us, how does it feel now that the trial's over? What are your thoughts? And obviously, it's not over. We just saw a filing that dropped this morning about the gag order, and there's sentencing left. So tell us your thoughts, Norm.
Well, I will. Let me start by saying how thrilled I am to be here on MissTrial, zooming up the podcast charts with Karen, Danya, and Kathleen. I'm truly delighted to be with you. I am feeling a mix of gratification and relief that the trial has concluded as it has, with a conviction on 34 felony counts of falsifying documents to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. The gratification comes from the overwhelming evidence that Donald Trump did engage in that election interference, and covering it up. It would have been a terrible miscarriage of justice if he were not held accountable. And I think that verdict is so important for accountability for Donald Trump, for deterrence, for him and others doing the same thing, with Trump having repeated that election interference in 2020. We're going to talk about why that case, the Supreme Court's the only reason we're not talking about a verdict in the 2020 Jack Smith federal election interference case. But at least we have this deterrence for Trump and his followers before 2024. So that mix of accountability and deterrence, I think, is so important, because what Trump did here, deceiving voters and covering it up, is really the essence of his autocratic approach to democracy. It's kind of attack elections and by an informed electorate participating in free and fair choice. It's the foundation of democracy. So attacking it, as Trump is now found by a jury of his peers found to have been guilty, is really an attack on our democracy itself and Donald Trump and his followers. He seized the entire leadership of the GOP now. The cancer has spread. That's the greatest threat to our country since the end of Jim Crow, maybe the greatest internal threat since before the Civil War, before and during the Civil War. So that verdict is important on so many levels. And also, I analyzed that there was very, very likely going to be a conviction. I went out on a limb. I fought people. I said, no, it's not about hush money. It's about covering up election interference. I even put it in the title of my book. So to have the jury unanimously find it was an election interference cover-up, I'm gratified for the country, but also personally relieved. Imagine how embarrassing if I had been wrong.
I can't help but be struck by the fact that. No, I was just saying, I can't help but be struck that Danya, who represented Michael Cohen and you were also in the trial, is now here with Norm. You guys, I want to hear, like, you have a conversation about this.
Well, I would love to. I first need to just preface my question to Norm with an expression of gratitude to Norm. Norm and I have been friends and colleagues for a long time. I've been lucky enough to write op-eds and white papers and amicus briefs with Norm. He was nice enough to guest lecture in my NYU legal ethics class, and the kids were enthralled. So I owe a lot to Norm. And I'm thrilled to have this conversation with Norm, to hear, Norm, your impressions. I was there for only a week. You toughed it out for 6. And I was really struck by and aghast at the dissonance between what I was hearing live in the testimony and the way it was reported to the public. So, you know, and you were always one of the clear-eyed truth tellers, but there were so many who were distorting what was happening. And that was, you know, that was a surprise to me. And I'm also shocked by the misinformation out there now that is largely being put out by Trump and his acolytes. You know, Biden rigged the system. You can't get a fair jury in Manhattan. You know, Donald Trump wasn't allowed to testify. I mean, there's so many myths out there. I'm just wondering your impression about how we deal with the misinformation. And you're an expert in this intersection between media, law, politics. And what is your plan now that you're finally done with this trial and you're moving on to great things? Like, how are you planning to attack the next phase and make sure this doesn't happen and we don't descend into authoritarianism and chaos? It's a big question.
I'll take those questions in order. And Danya, it's so great to have you back in the public discourse, because Danya really stepped aside, appropriately so, from having these kinds of conversations while she was representing Michael and in the midst of the trial. So it's wonderful to be able to chat again. First, on the question of what was going on in the trial, you know, it's very tough for people who are not in the courtroom to understand how a cross-examination landed. Just to analyze the questioner, say a Todd Blanche, but also the witness, Michael Cohen, and then to also have a sense of how it landed with the jury. Well, I don't know what you did while you were there for Michael, but I spent at least half my time in court watching the jury, and I was particularly attentive. You and I were on a CNN panel, and we talked about this after the testimony. I was particularly attentive to how the jury reacted to Michael. And so I was able to say in real time, yeah, when they confronted him with, you know, some document that he hadn't seen before, and his recollection was refreshed, and he was visibly, you know, thinking about it on the stand. What he was doing was trying to tell the truth and remembering. It was not these were not Perry Mason moments, and the jury didn't see him that way. And it was so clear to me, and thank goodness that I was able to go on the air. CNN, I had a daily trial diary. I wrote about this, and I went on the air pretty much every day throughout the trial to talk about what I saw really going on and to better inform the public that, you know, what a good job Michael did on his testimony, that the jury clearly believed him. If people had any doubt about it, when a jury comes back in a day and a half, that tells you that they believe Michael. I'm of the view that the prosecution had to have him. And I said publicly that the failure, you know, that they did not cross the Rubicon of proof beyond a reasonable doubt until after Michael's direct testimony. So that proves that the jury validated Michael's words And I'm disappointed. I expect Trump and his allies to peddle disinformation. It's very disappointing to me when those who know better do that. At a minimum, you should have the humility to say, hey, I was not there, so I don't know how it landed, not to draw all kinds of exaggerated and false. And some people who know better made out and out false statements, just shocking. That being said, a verdict cures all ailments, and now everybody understands. And I'll just say one more word about your last question. What now on this threat of autocracy in our nation? We need to sound the alarm. This was the closing paragraph of my New York Times op-ed. Very privileged to be a regular guest essayist there. And I wrote for my post-trial editorial, I wrote the case for why Trump should be sentenced to jail, I think less than a year in jail. And the last paragraph of that, I said one of the important parts of the verdict, and I think the message that would be sent by a jail sentence is an alarm to the American people about the threat we face. Because if you look at Trump and his allies' responses, I just went up before I got on the podcast, the American Autocracy Threat Tracker. We track all of Trump and his allies' promises, hundreds and hundreds, to impose a dictatorship in the United States. He admits he's going to be a dictator on day one. And there's a new element now of naked and baseless retaliation for the guilty verdict. So I think imposing a jail sentence will sound the alarm. Just Trump's reaction to conviction has sounded the alarm to the American people that what he's promising for 2025 is not normal. And I think when that choice is clearly presented, the American people are going to reject dictatorship. They don't want someone running this country who's going to sick his DOJ on his political adversaries just because he was convicted, even though they did nothing wrong.
I mean, it's just so stark, right? He's claiming that Biden rigged DOJ against him when DOJ has nothing to do with this prosecution.
Nothing.
Well, at the very same time,
not only that,
his own son is being prosecuted by DOJ, and he stood back. So
that is such a good point, Danya. That is such an excellent point. Can you imagine a scenario where, Joe Biden's son is being prosecuted by Joe Biden's Department of Justice? Joe Biden has the power to pardon his son, and he is stepping back and he is allowing the system to work as it may. And that is in stark contrast. I think it's such a good point. It's such stark contrast to what Donald Trump will do if he were to become president. He's going to hand out, I think I tweeted about this morning. He's going to hand out pardons like candy, and he'll pardon himself. And that's that. I mean, and so for him to say Joe Biden is going out and doing things for political purposes, he would have pardoned his son, right? Instead, it's not like that. The justice system and politics have nothing to do with each other. It never has. And that he is stepping aside and letting it be the way it is. And I think that's just an excellent point that just really highlights the misinformation.
Yeah. And look at the prosecutors, the special prosecutors who looked into the Biden documents case, right? He went out of his way to install a Trump appointed prosecutor, right? And same with prosecution against Hunter Biden, so that there really couldn't be any claims of favoritism or nepotism or rigged system. So it's pretty. The contrast really is incredibly sharp, and should defang these accusations of a rigged DOJ, but somehow has not.
Norm, I have just been dying to talk to you about an institution that, in my opinion, has gone relatively unattacked, I guess, for lack of a better term. I spent 8 years in the House of Representatives, and it seems to me that the media has never had any problem attacking any of the bodies, the executive branch, whomever the president is, the Senate, senators, House members, and the Supreme Court, albeit their decisions have been poured over and criticized over and over. It seems to me that during my time in Washington, the politicization of the Supreme Court was something that was very, very disturbing to see. And it's not just because, Donald Trump was able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, although given their age, that pretty much sets the course for the direction that the court is going to be going in the future. But there's a lot of talk about, if Democrats get into power, they're going to pack the Supreme Court, expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Where is the ethical watchdog for the Supreme Court? And I'm not just talking about the recent reportings on Justice Thomas or Justice Alito. It's also, as was mentioned before, how they're going to deal with cases that come to them that involve January 6th and all of these cases that are kind of being stymied right now, where Trump is a defendant. And so my question to you is, I always would say to people, young people, when they would say, why should I vote? And I would say, do you care about your rights? You're just any right that you have, then you should care about who the president is, because they can impact the direction this country takes vis-a-vis the Supreme Court and their appointments. And that, I think, is becoming much more clear to people now, especially women, given recent decisions by the Supreme Court. So just your take on the Supreme Court, and is it me just thinking that it has become hyper politicized? And what do you just opine on that branch of government, if you will?
Kathleen, it's such a good question, because we should be talking about the conviction of Donald Trump in the 2020 election interference case in DC, the 2016 Manhattan one. Alvin Bragg was perfectly willing to let that go forward. We had an early March trial date. The Supreme Court was presented with this totally bogus absolute immunity case in January. They could have resolved it then. There's no need to take 6 months to determine that Donald Trump, whether Donald Trump has the absolute presidential immunity to send SEAL Team 6 to commit political assassinations. That's his claim. Come on. And in its own way, claiming he has the power to interfere with state elections is as absurd. There's no constitutional authority to do that. So the Supreme Court, the Alito, Thomas, Maga wing, but supported, made complicit by others who joined with them. There's absolutely no basis to stall this case other than to give Donald Trump a leg up in the election. And we need to admit that what the Supreme Court has done is outrageous, and it bespeaks the larger corruption of that institution. Mm-hmm. I mean, Justice Alito, we now have these flag scandals. He was openly affiliating, his home was openly affiliating with insurrectionist symbols. He blames his wife, but surely he noticed there was an upside down flag in front of his house, or the other flag.
It's a woman's right to choose, Norm.
Say again, Danya.
I said that's a woman's right to choose, which of course is.
Yes. And just like the choice, Trump Alito is an ally, just like on the other side, and he needs to own it, not to blame the woman, as he's done with his wife. And then you have Thomas, whose wife chose to participate in the events leading up to January 6th, who was a witness in the January 6th committee, who was directly communicating with those baselessly challenging that election. They have no business sitting on the court. They should be subtracted And if you subtract the two of them, there's no longer the 5 votes that you need for at least some of the court's actions.
Norman, can I just jump in and ask you, how common?
Terrible.
Can I just
terrible. Go ahead.
Can I, just for the public's knowledge, how has anyone ever recused themselves? How common is it? Because of course the political attack is, oh, well, now you're saying that these justices should recuse themselves, but you weren't saying it before during X, Y, and Z. So
yeah,
how common is it?
The justices do recuse. So it's not uncommon, but Thomas and Alito are totally unrepentant. Thomas actually did recuse himself from one of the cases, so he's well aware of this. The problem with the court is that it's self-executing. They will not, it's so contrary to the American idea that the only judges in America for whom there's no recourse and they make their own decisions. It goes back to when King George III was ruling our country, that the Chief Justice has said, I'm sorry, if they're unethical, there's nothing we can do about it. No, he could force them off. He could have a vote of the court. There's a great deal that needs to be done. There's a federal statute that they're violating. And it is so outrageous, both the conflict, the delay in the January 6th case, their naked defiance of law. The Supreme Court is running amok. That has to be changed. We must add members to the Supreme Court. It's an illegitimate court that Mitch McConnell colluded first to block Merrick Garland without any basis in the last year of Obama, then to ram through Amy Coney Barrett in the last days of the Trump administration. The hypocrisy. So the stink of illegitimacy, conflict, corruption, and complicity with Donald Trump. Alito and Thomas are acting more like Trump's defense counsel. Like the outside counsel of Donald Trump. They're his enablers in blocking accountability as he runs to retain the powers that Jack Smith has accused him of abusing. I'm so glad you asked the question, Kathleen. It's just outrageous. Yeah. It's one of the worst offenses against democracy anywhere in our country, right?
Just one final thing, Norm. Do you think that Supreme Court justices should be term limited?
Yes. I wrote an essay at Brookings on why we need to add seats to immediately. They're on a slippery slope to autocracy. The seats must be added, expand the court, and term limit. So every president gets to appoint. Will be much more democratic.
Well, speaking of anti-democratic, you said that's one of the worst things you've seen of late. I was shocked and horrified by the statement by a number of senators that they will not vote on anything, including judicial appointments and legislation, anything other than Defense Department appropriations, I think, in light of the verdict. And that, Kathleen, I don't think you've seen anything like that in your 2 terms, right? And would you ever imagined a statement like that?
No, it's just outrageous. Look, in election years, very little, as we all know, gets done during an election year. It's never been, sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's not. Trump basically saying to all the Republicans, if you vote for this border bill, which was the most comprehensive border bill to come, it was bipartisan out of the Senate, it would have passed. But he said, forget it, don't do it. We don't want to give Joe Biden a win. That kind of crass political motivation usually happens, but in an election year, there normally isn't a lot done. But to come out and say that is, I think, where they've kind of crossed the line, Danya, to your point.
It's just saying it out loud, I guess.
Yeah, the quiet part out loud.
Better than,
that's what strikes me as so shocking about the MAGA movement is for a while there, it felt like there were these dog whistles and we're not sure. And this is what it means. They're just blatantly outright saying exactly what they mean. They, Project 2025, where, it's absolutely clear what their plans are for the country. And people think we're exaggerating when we say that when there's a vote come November, you're really voting for democracy or not. Maybe people legitimately don't want to live in a democracy anymore, but that's exactly where we're headed. And they're being very open about it. There's nothing alarmist about it. I mean, go read what they're putting out, look at what they're doing. And if that's what people are choosing, but that's where we are. But that's what's so shocking to me about all of what you're saying.
And in my American Autocracy Threat Tracker, the 3rd edition is out.
Where is that? Where is that, Norm?
Just today on Just Security. You'll find hundreds and hundreds of the promises that Donald Trump and his followers are making to impose a dictatorship in America. They are not hiding it. It starts with the response to the New York case, and nakedly saying, without any alleged criminality by Trump's opponents, that they are going to be prosecuted. They need to be in jail. Laura Loomer, who Trump has embraced, even says they need to face the death penalty. But it's not just a response to the conviction. They go through, we go through hundreds and hundreds of other concrete commitments to attack the law in over 20 different areas: immigration, climate change, choice, and on and on and on, where they're hiding in plain sight the plans for this country.
Yeah, first of all, I love whenever you talk to Norm about anything, he will say, well, I wrote about this, in the New York Times or working institutions, security.
There's a white paper.
I never met anyone as prolific as Norm.
He's so prolific. In fact, he called me this morning I'm writing something right now, and he called me this morning to find out when I'm going to be done, because apparently I'm taking too long. I'm not writing 10 papers, 10 things in a day. Sorry, Norm.
Yeah, you can write a different paper with each hand. It's really dictating.
Karen, look at the bright side. At least I didn't ask you live on the podcast. I had the decency to call you up from the train.
I want to get back to, if you don't mind, if we can get back to Alvin Bragg's the first, if we go in chronological order in terms of Donald Trump's attempts to steal the election, the first time that he tried and succeeded to steal the election, that he was just convicted for. I just want to finish that before we leave that, because the case isn't over. There's still sentencing. There's still a gag order in effect. And, there are people who are opining, why is there still a gag order? But the jurors still need to be protected. I mean, there's the jurors have not come out and spoken publicly. I give them a lot of credit for that. Not even the alternates. So they're staying quiet. They're staying silent. I am sure that
the judge encouraged them, and they took the hint.
That being said, I'm sure there are certain family members who know they were on that jury, right? Or certain close friends and family members, and that's still not getting out. So people are keeping it close. And I think everything's okay. If Donald Trump were to come out and start to criticize the jury and say that this was, he couldn't get a fair jury, that he wanted it moved to Staten Island, because that's, they said that people in Manhattan can't be fair. The stuff about Judge Merchan and the fact that he donated a de minimis amount of money, so therefore he couldn't be fair there. And so, they go on and on about all these lies about the trial, but in particular the jurors. If the gag order is not in effect, you can imagine a scenario where they could end up in a situation like Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, right, where their lives were ruined because,
that's a terrifying specter. I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, there's also, there's a gag order and then there's a protective order. So I think probably certain elements of the gag order might be lifted, including statements against, Michael, because he has been out there talking. I mean, we'll see about that. But I'll say, there is still a need that I at least perceive. Michael has been doxxed, not only Michael, but his, innocent children and his wife have been doxxed. And so they've been inundated with threats and also bizarre kind of things like people ordering pizza to their home. I think just as like a bit of a shake of the fist, like we know where you are. I've been getting letters to my home. I don't know how my home address is out there. So it is a scary prospect, and it does seem like there's a reason the gag order is still in place, and there are about to be arguments about it, and will be interesting to see what the judge does. But I'm hoping he keeps it in place at least until sentencing, because the threat is still there. There's no question, and tempers are still up. Passions are up.
Wow. I think the most likely place, the jurors certainly need that protection, right?
Yeah.
They have to have it. Now we'll see what he does as to witnesses. I think he has a legal basis to do it. I have such confidence in Judge Merchan, having seen him for every day of that very long 6 weeks that Karen alludes to. I did yield my seat one afternoon. I went back in a particularly long day. Karen took
you yielded it to me, yeah,
fellow CNN analyst with permission.
And I got to see Hope Hicks, which was amazing.
Hope Hicks.
I was there when Hope Hicks broke down crying, and
the beginning of Hope Hicks.
And she was so clear. I have a question for Kathleen, if you don't mind, my illustrious co-host, who was also the elected district attorney in Nassau County, which is similar to the position Alvin Bragg has been in all this time. Can you just give us a perspective on, Kathleen, what that was like, what you think Alvin Bragg was going through, what it's like for him to get these constant threats, what it's like for him to have the baseball bat to his head next to a picture of Donald Trump, yet he continued to be clear-headed and didn't speak much publicly, and he's had more death threats and race, like the things that have happened to him. People say, oh, that's part of the job description. Can you give us your perspective? I've never asked you this question before, but I really think that people need to hear, because you sat in those shoes. You ran in office, had to make tough decisions, and were the elected district attorney.
Well, so, I think that Alvin Bragg is a class act, and I think he has comported himself that way through this entire process. People who run for office sign up for the public scrutiny that comes with, especially as a DA, making difficult decisions that are not going to be popular with everyone. There's always going to be someone who likes what you do and someone who doesn't. What we don't sign up for, and Alvin Bragg certainly didn't sign up for, is the physical threats, the death threats, and all these horrible things that, Danya, you too have been subjected to, and Norm, you probably as well, that, are so ubiquitous now for anyone who has an opinion or is anyone who's in a position where you're making decisions. I think it must have been really difficult for Alvin, especially in light, and I'm not, saying anything bad about Cy Vance, but Alvin made a difficult decision. I think it was the right decision, and a jury felt that way as well. But that's why you want people like him in those positions. You want people who are not going to kind of blow with the wind and be influenced by what the public's opinion is. You want someone like Alvin who's going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And certainly, Norm, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, I don't know how much money the final tally was that Donald Trump or one of his super PACs was able to raise in the immediate aftermath of this election. But, there is a lot of concern on the Democratic side that, is this going to backfire on us in November? And I'm just curious about your thoughts with that.
No, I do not think it is going to backfire on us. It is true that Trump raised tens of millions from his base.
Yeah.
But we every day has brought a new poll or multiple new polls, Kathleen, suggesting that the effect of a conviction is to drive about half of independents to lean against voting for Trump, and even 10 to 15% of his own party. If we're a long ways out, but if that holds, that will be fatal to his prospects. So he doesn't need, look, he can use the money, but he doesn't need more support from his own people. He needs to be able to assemble a winning coalition in key swing states. Newsweek is just out this morning with polling data from multiple swing states where Donald Trump has been pushed into second place by the conviction. So I think, notwithstanding the good fundraising days, that this was very, very bad news. And Trump and his allies know that. And that is why we've seen this furious and unprecedented pushback on the conviction that we write about in the American Autocracy Threat Tracker out this morning, our third edition at Just Security, pointing out that they are saying, well, we're going to retaliate. Even though there's no crimes by the opponents, we're going to prosecute them. That is a sign of desperation, not of success. And the backlash, it's a sign of frontlash on Donald Trump and the movement he leads, not backlash on Democrats.
Want to talk about sentencing?
I'm delighted to. I am delighted to. You know, I have my Times piece up on point, and I think that Trump should be sentenced to a term of incarceration. So I'm ready to answer your questions.
So, Norm, I was just going to say, you know, if you now, granted, this is an unprecedented sentencing because no prior president of the United States has ever been facing a sentence in criminal court. But putting that aside, would the offense, and this is what people wanted, I mean, again, this is feeding into the whole echo chamber that is MAGA and their rhetoric. But would this typically be a case where a first-time offender gets a jail sentence?
Yes, it could be. We did, as part of researching and writing my book, Trying Trump, A Guide to His First Election Interference Criminal Trial, we looked, Kathleen, at about 10,000 felony falsifying business records cases starting in 2015. And what we found, I'm going to have another essay later this month with more of the details, or later this week, I think, if I can get to it. We found that there are many, probably 10, 12% of the FBR cases result in sentences of incarceration. And this is the most serious FBR case in the history of New York because it was a conspiracy to influence an election. As prosecutors pointed out, it might have worked. This might have actually hiding this information from voters might have saved the election for Trump in 2016. So only 40,000 women in 3 states would have needed to flip to deliver that election to Hillary Clinton. So I think it merits a jail sentence. I think if the judge meets one out, it'll probably be less than a year. He is a first-time offender. First-time offenders, I'm writing about a bunch of these cases in this essay. First-time offenders get jail for FBR crimes too. It's a Class E felony. Some people say, oh, Class E, it's the least serious felony. Over 20% of Class E felonies result in jail time, even though that is the lowest level New York State felony. So all of the data suggests jail time is on the table. Now, will Justice Merchan give Trump a jail sentence? Nobody knows. I think he should. But I have a lot of faith in his fairness, and he'll weigh and balance the factors in both directions in order to make a determination. And that's how it should be.
No, I'm surprised you think it's a classy felony. Sorry. Little New York statutory joke.
The statute, yeah. Don't blame me, blame the drafters. They set up the classy felonies. They're called classy because they're the least serious.
Yeah. Letter E.
You better explain for the listeners who are scratching their head.
Yeah.
This was a classless.
Class E. Class
As in E.
All E.
That's what the name of the podcast.
Right.
He is an elephant, not classy.
All right. I think Norm
this felony was the least classy felony.
Right.
You weren't there for some of the Stormy Daniels testimony, but there was nothing classy about what she described about Donald Trump. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
Yes. No, it was.
This is a family podcast. That's why you have
Thank you for keeping it clean, Norm.
Family can listen and enjoy.
Norm, we can't thank you enough for taking the time and squeezing us into your extremely busy schedule. I'm sure you'll be writing 10 more white papers today by the time this podcast concludes.
I wrote an op-ed while we were broadcasting.
Exactly.
So many ideas. Hey,
there's nobody who.
I think it is so terrific that the three of you are teaming up to do this with your different perspectives. Three wonderful friends who I admire so much. I'm so delighted to be with you in the early days. You know, I was also a guest during the first week, the beginning run of Pod Save America, and look what happened to them. You guys, I checked though, you're like Pod Save America adjacent. So amazing.
That's my favorite podcast. I listen to it when I run in the morning.
I hope I don't tank your ratings. If next week you fall like 10, it's going to be, oh my God, Norm killed us.
Never again.
We're so lucky to have you on to have this really important discussion, Norm. Thank you. And we hope you'll come back again.
Anytime.
Thank you, Norm.
You know, the Jews, you guys are MissTrial, right? Like in our Jewish synagogues, we have the sisterhood. So maybe I'll be the brotherhood. I'll lead the brotherhood of the MissTrial podcast fandom.
There you go.
All right, you're on.
Thank you.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.